It is just a huge, huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Dr. Suzanne Marie Ebert, DDS, who graduated from the University of Louisville College of Dentistry. Following a one-year GPR, she entered private practice as an associate in St. Augustine, Florida. She started her solo private practice in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, where she treated friends and family for 11 years. Upon the sale of her practice, she elected to continue her care providing dental care to indigent populations by becoming the dental director at a locally federally qualified health center. Under her tenure, the clinics expanded, ran efficiently and profitably while addressing real needs in the community, including elder care, special needs care, and ER diversion. Dr. Ebert also became heavily involved in Florida Dental Association leadership, where my classmate Cesar Sabatez just became the president-elect. Go Cesar. Rising through the chairs of her local component and ultimately into the position of trustee for the Florida Dental Association. As adjunct faculty for the University of Florida, she had the privilege of working directly with senior dental students as they rotated through her clinics. Dr. Ebert considers herself a clinical dentist first and is unwavering in her desire to protect private practice dentistry. She is a vocal advocate of having a strong association to lead the dental profession through the issues facing it today. Dr. Ebert is currently the vice president of dental practice and relationship management for the ADA Business Innovation Groups. So she did her GPR, University of Florida, her DMD at University of Louisville. Did I say Louisville right?
Louisville. You have to put a bunch of marbles in your mouth first, Howard.
Oh my gosh, you won't believe this if I tell you. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So my dad, I learned everything from my dad, who had 5 Sonic drive-ins in Wichita, but he wanted to go global, so he went north, put one Abilene, Kansas, Kearney, Nebraska, went south down to Childress, Texas, and for east, it was Louisville. So I was always, the summer between every high school year, I was always on the opening crew of a new restaurant. So I spent a summer in Louisville, and that was so damn cool. My gosh, the only bad thing I did there was when we first pulled in, we saw our first tobacco field. So I wanted to jump out and pull a couple to take back home, to save them as souvenirs. And evidently you can do that in Iowa corn farms, but you can't pull a tobacco plant out of the ground. And I learned that at about 14 years old. About got shot. But my gosh, I wonder if you to start this out, if you could just go back in time to when you graduated from Louisville. What the hell are they supposed to do? They graduated in the middle of a pandemic. The class of 2020, I'm doing this podcast. I don't really care about a bunch of 58-year-old fat, bald dentists who have 6 grandchildren and debt-free and money. I'm worried about these kids coming out of school with $400,000 in student loans. You're in this doing a lot of in the practice transitions. Let me tell you how bad that is. Dentaltown always had, we've always had free classified ads, and we've always had about 1,000 dentists selling their practice listed, and about 5,000 jobs. Now it's 2,000 dentists saying, I'm done, I'm out of here, and only 1,000 jobs. So these kids are coming out of school. The only people hiring are DSOs, which is why I've been trying to podcast all the DSOs here in Arizona. I had so many young kids saying, well, who owns MB2? Do that guy. So I did Dr. V. My gosh, what advice would you give him?
Well, what you're talking about is one of the main reasons I got into this role at ADA Practice Transitions. I worked with senior dental students for 6.5 years. They rotated in 2-week rotations through my clinic. And when they would come into the clinic, I would always ask, so what are you going to do next year? And the ones that weren't going into a residency and weren't going into a family practice that they already had established, they had no idea what to do. So the common response was, I have absolutely no options. I'm just going to go work in a DSO. And I said, well, you actually do have some options. Let's go over those options. And I think what resonated the most with me was towards the end of that 6.5 years, I noticed that I kept hearing the same thing over again. I know I'm going to hate my first year in practice. And I said, you're graduating with $400,000 in student debt, and you're telling me that it's okay for you to hate your first year in practice? That doesn't make any sense to me. So let's go over what your options really are. You do have some private practice options. You just need to go looking for them. You have to have a place where you can land that's going to help you develop the skill set that you want to develop. So find a place that shares the way you want to practice. Find a dentist that you really respect. You respect what they're doing, both clinically, you respect the way they treat their staff, you respect the way they interact with their community. If you can find that, how great would it be to go in and be an associate within that practice and potentially take it over someday? I'm hoping that some of them took my advice. I actually know a couple that did, and they were very successful at it. And when I heard about ADA practice transitions, I thought this is an opportunity for me to make a difference in many young dentists' lives and help them to find a place where they can be personally and financially successful. This group that you're talking about right now that's graduating, Howard, I can't even imagine how they are feeling as they're entering this either last year of dental school or they graduated in 2020. We all know that their clinical time was cut short. And even the class now, the schools have slowed down in order to follow the proper procedures, and they are not getting the clinical skills that they would normally get. So what we're trying to really promote is this whole idea of mentorship. And like you said, many of these docs, especially in maybe some smaller markets, are saying, I'm done. I don't want to go back to the office full time. I just don't want to deal with this anymore, and I'm ready to sell. So why not explore some new options for this group? Why not explore the options of true mentorship where the owner is maybe backing away, and they're backing away at an accelerated rate. And that younger doc is coming in and really taking over the entire practice. But it's a delayed sale opportunity where maybe the sale doesn't happen for about 2 years. It really is the best of both worlds as long as both the incoming doctor and the owner doctor are really prepared to follow this through all the way to the end. And that's, again, one of the things that we really emphasize here at ADA Practice Transitions. And that is spell out everything in the beginning. Make sure that your ultimate goals are in alignment so that you can lay them out very clearly and on paper and then follow through.
That is why I asked you to come on the show. You didn't ask me because the ADA has a practice transition, and where I first became known of it was your article that I posted on Dental Town. What went wrong? My transition fell through after months of planning by Suzanne Ebert, Vice President of Dental Practice and Relationship Management. So for my homies who are the lucky ones are just commuting to work for an hour. The poor bastards are on a treadmill right now, so try to distract them so they don't realize they're on a treadmill for an hour. They can't read this, but tell them about your blog. What went wrong? How did your transition fall through after months of planning? And why did this motivate you to go help the ADA start this ADA practice transitions?
Well, there are a number of what went wrongs out there, unfortunately. I have my own personal what went wrong. And then we have the one that you're referencing, I believe, in the blog post. And that is where an incoming doctor or potential buyer was looking at a certain practice. They really wanted this practice, and the owner didn't quite have everything in order. So for about 6 months, this owner was trying to pull information from his accountant and from his books, and all of this is going on right before the pandemic hit. The incoming doctor, potential buyer, got cold feet is really what ended up happening, and thought that the practice now, it's not well run, it's not got what it takes to support them in their ultimate goal of personal and financial success, and it just didn't work out. Could this have been avoided? Absolutely. If the owner had all of that paperwork in order, ready to hand off to that potential buyer in a nice little package. Said, okay, here you go. That would have made this thing much easier. The financing would have gone through a lot faster, and everybody would have had a successful transition. So again, one of the things that we really emphasize, and let me just say this was not with one of my clients, because what we emphasize is, here's your list of documents you need to get in order. Have them ready to pass off. Make sure that you're entirely ready for your transition, whether you are an owner or you are a potential buyer. If you're a potential buyer, make sure your financing is lined up. Make sure that you know exactly what you can and cannot afford. Make sure that your personal finances are 100% solid. Make sure that you know what your credit score is. Talk to the banks firsthand. Make sure that you have a couple of different banks that you're working with. Find the best deal. All of those things are so important to making sure that your transition is successful.
You know, I don't want to be that guy. I never forget when I watched the movie, documentary, whatever, on Sesame Street. The two most famous characters are Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch. And I had 4 kids watch all this. Turns out, it was by the same guy, and he ruled Sesame Street forever, then got beaten out by Elmo later on, the little red one. And guess why Oscar the Grouch was so popular? Guess why kids love Oscar? I mean, it's a guy living in a trash can. In fact, they rejected the idea at first. They said, we can't have a man living in a trash can. That's not right. But guess who it reminded them of? Their grandpa. Some old grouchy guy. And during this last election, how many times did some 2-year-old watch his grandpa yelling at the TV, whether he was for this team or that team? I don't want to be that guy, but I'm that guy. I mean, my 4 kids have turned into 6 grandkids, and I just think it was so much better in the 80s when if you bought a practice, the seller would finance. I mean, it was like his baby. You wouldn't just give your baby up to the highest bidder and then leave and never hear about your baby. I mean, he built his practice with his own hands or his patients. He wanted a good guy. And you would go in there and he'd say, okay, I'll sell it to you for this, 7 years terms, 10% interest. And then that dentist that bought the practice, it's really great because the guy selling has skin in the game. So when he's working on a patient and he says, oh my God, I really messed up on this patient, Mrs. Ebert, and she's really mad, then he would call you and he had a relationship with you. It was just much better. And now it's through a third-person banker, and it's like just take the money and run. I just think it should go back to that way, but that's not the way it is. And I know I'm Oscar the Grouch, and I need to just shut the hell up. But does the ADA practice transitions? Do you have a bank source that you can that they can default to if they don't have a personal banker? No one's wants to do the deal. If they go through you, can you always find them a banker that will do it?
We can most certainly point them in the right direction and help them to understand what the terms are. And we can also give them, the incoming doctors, a kind of a go-to list of things that they need to have in order before they start this process. But I'd like to go back to your previous comment, Mr. Oscar the Grouch, because I don't know if Oscar had a wife, but I might be that wife. I'm not sure.
Do you like cookies?
Absolutely. And I love baking them for my grandchildren, I must say.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you that what we want to do is bring some more of that idea of having the dentists be participants, active participants in this process. That's what we want. That's our ultimate goal. We want our docs to talk to each other. We want them to have an open dialogue about what their futures hold, whether you're retiring or whether you're buying a practice. You need to be able to provide continuity of care for those patients. And I think more and more now than ever, if a practice is going to be successful, there has to be that compatible philosophy of care that's transferred from the owner to the buyer or the buyer to the owner. It has to be compatible. Everybody has to be able to work towards the ultimate goal of providing a great experience for those patients. And that's what makes a successful transition. When I'm talking about personal and financial success, I'm talking about it for both docs. I'm talking about it for the owner doc who can transfer out of that practice and understand that their patients and their staff and their communities are going to be taken care of because, as you said, this is their legacy. It's their baby. Sometimes it's a family legacy where their grandfather or their father started the practice. For the incoming doctor, the new buyer, I mean, come on, they have to be able to relate to that staff. They have to be able to relate to those patients. And if they can continue to provide a great experience, or at least a consistent experience for those patients, the patients are going to stay. And that has to be something that needs to be taken into consideration. Just going through a third party where you just meet at the end of when you sign the contracts, to me is ridiculous. There's no place for that in dentistry. We are a relationship-driven business. And we need to make sure that we're taking our patients' considerations into account.
I know these are challenging times, but you talked in your own bio. It says Dr. Ebert considers herself a clinical dentist first and is unwavering in her desire to protect private practice dentistry. And the ADA is just like your parents. I mean, you can't win or lose when the kid's upset and crying and hurt. And when this pandemic broke out, the first thing I told the president of the ADA is, trust me, you're going to be the whipping boy for this. I mean, when dentists close down for 2 months, they're not happy. And when they're not happy, they don't think of the nicest, sweetest things to say about their parents, their mom and dad. You know, you've all seen that in your own family. But how can you say that in your desire to protect private practice dentistry if the fastest growing format in dentistry is DSOs? In fact, of those, we had 5,000 help wanted ads, and it dropped down to 1,000. It was only DSOs. And I think this pandemic has been the best thing for the brand of DSOs because a lot of dentists just didn't want to fight a pandemic head on. And I'm in Arizona, which is ground zero for DSOs, because Governor Ducey passed a law that if you got an active license anywhere in the United States, it's good in Arizona. And it was actually triggered because of registered nurses. They were actually recruiting in Ireland, and it was easier to get an Irish nurse a green card and fly her to Arizona to become a registered nurse than to find one in Oklahoma who didn't want to pass the boards, whatever. But 18.6% of Arizona dentists work for DSO. And then yesterday, out of nowhere, Bob Fontana of Aspen Dental Management just acquired Clear Choice. I mean, these guys are just a steamroller, but is it politically correct or incorrect for you to say that you are like me, where I want my grandchildren to go to a dentist? And if that dentist is working for an insurance company and some MBA's telling him that he can do this or can't do that, then my granddaughter needs a dentist. And if she goes to another dentist and it's owned by Wall Street and they want profit dollars, I mean, where's my grandchild going to go when she needs a dentist? And I'm not talking about my 4 grandchildren that are boys. I'm talking about my girls, Evelyn and, where's Evelyn and Taylor going to go if all the dentists sold out their means of production? They no longer can work with their hands. And by the way, every time there's an economic downturn, the people that come out on top are always the ones that owns their means of production, because if there's runaway inflation because of your $23 trillion of debt, they just raise their prices. But you know who's first to go? Is extra employees when their sales go down. So when you sell out your means of production and go become an employee, that's all great when everything's good, but trust me, when things are bad, you want to own your means of production. But I'm just wondering how that works in the ADA, who, like I say, during a pandemic, they're not going to be able to do anything right. But how are you allowed to support unwavering support for private practice when the fastest growing business model is DSO?
Well, we can find places for these dentists to go. Number one, let's think about some of the smaller markets. Let's talk about those for a second. The DSOs aren't going to the smaller towns.
Great point. They're not rural. No, absolutely not.
They're not going there. And think about how great some of those practices are. You have patients who want to be there because you're potentially the only dentist in town. You have a very low purchase price from an existing doctor who's selling the practice. What does that equal to? Gosh, you have a payback on that loan, sometimes as little as 1.5 to 2 years, and you can be the full owner, no debt on that practice. You have a lower cost of living in those smaller towns. You can live like a king or a queen. And guess what? If you want to travel, you can travel. Even if you're not next to a major airport, go buy a plane. Because you have, in many cases, unlimited income potential in those smaller towns. So let's talk about all of those small town dentists who are out there and the wonderful opportunity that exists for some of these docs who are sick of the hustle and bustle and the marketing costs that are involved with trying to stay afloat in some of these larger markets in the urban areas. Let's talk about how nice it is to raise a family in an area where you don't have to worry about them walking outside the door. Think about all of those advantages. There's a wonderful opportunity out there for these younger docs if they would just open their minds to exploring them.
That was brilliant. You touche'd me. If there ever was a touche on this show, you touche'd me, because it's obvious they will not go to rural. So that's where half of America lives. I mean, I was born in Wichita, Kansas. I'm familiar with the flyover states. You watch the news and everything only happens on the coast, right? And in fact, over here in Arizona, we're so jealous of Florida. I mean, we're the Florida of the West. How come no one ever talks about Arizona? We're just as crazy as Florida, which, by the way, only seems crazy because they have the only transparent criminal justice data. So all journalists can mine their data, where other states, they can't mine that data. But yeah, they're not going to rural because the millennials, they're getting married a decade later than they were in the 1940s. It's gone from, basically, like 16 to 17 all the way to 26, 27. They're single. They like their Starbucks and mochas and whatever they do, and they're not going to rural. And these DSOs, I mean, you go back 10 years, a lot of them, that had, by the time they got to 500 offices on any given day, they could have 20 rural practices not staffed with a dentist, and they're done. And so you're right. So half of America, you just said brilliantly, is never going to go DSO. And then the other half living in the metro, they're certainly not going to take over the whole market. So independent practice has the advantage. But I was wondering about another question about the ADA. This space was really branded, 50 years ago. I don't want to say 50 years ago. I don't want to make Alan F. Thornburg feel too old. But Alan, AFCO and Associates, AFCO stands for Alan F. Thornburg. And he started this a gazillion years ago. And he had a model that was very efficient, but the lawyers didn't like. And that was, he didn't want to have two lawyers fighting over the price. So he said, look, we're going to get this done. We're going to have his lawyer represent both parties and get it done. Of course, every attorney will tell you, well, then who's representing you? You have to have a lawyer representing you. And Alan was like, forget it. You can't get two dentists to agree on anything. You can't get two dentists to agree on a bonding agent. How the hell are you going to get them to agree on a financial terms? But what makes me wonder is, we know how Alan started it, dual representation, let's get her done. So what was the ADA? What did you think? What did you guys have that you thought was so unique to practice transitions and valuation and this deal, where you thought you guys at the ADA could have a unique, valuable approach to this? How were you seeing it?
Well, one of the most important things is that we're approaching this a little bit differently. Instead of talking first about the valuation, what we're talking about first is, are the dentists compatible? And I've talked about that a little bit before, but that's where we start. We start with, is this the right place for you? If it's the right place, then let's start talking about the other details that go into it. So we start with an online profile. It's pretty extensive, and we've been called the Match.com for dentists. And
nice.
I'm kind of sort of okay with that, but I prefer master matchmakers because we behind the scenes go through and match up these profiles, and we match them up based on the philosophy of care. So we only put together dentists who have the ability to communicate with each other. And then we act as facilitators for that conversation. We're not negotiating for the dentist. We expect, and this is what I talked about earlier, we expect the dentist to take ownership of this process because then it's going to be successful. We found that most of our owner docs wanted to, they want somebody who's going to continue their legacy. That's what they want. So they have to be involved in the process if they want to have success there. So we give the dentists very concrete things to discuss. We give them toolkits and worksheets and guides, discussion guides, and we're there as facilitators for that conversation. So they may not be able to agree on the bonding agent, and that's okay. But you know what? They're having no problem really agreeing on the purchase price. They're not having a problem agreeing how to handle the accounts receivable. They're not having that problem because they already have a relationship with each other. Because another thing about dentists is they're not very confrontational.
You don't
that
think
actually
dentists
works to our advantage.
You think dentists aren't very confrontational?
Dentists are confrontational in certain situations, but in a one-on-one, they're generally not.
Yeah, one-on-one, I love them. But my God, when it's 11 o'clock at night and they're drinking and they're behind a screen and they don't have that 100 million years of biological evolution where, you have more muscles in your face than you do below your hips and core. I mean, that's why emojis became so serious because you didn't know if the person was joking or this, that. The typos go up. On Dental Town, I can just read the post and tell you, was this early morning sober on coffee? Or was this drunk bastard 11 o'clock, barking at the moon, and the typos go off the deal? So that is the weird thing about social media. People, they forget that there's a human being sitting on the other side. And what's funny is, and I'll call dentists on their own bullshit any day of the week, because I'm not here to be their friend. I'm here to be their grandfather, to tell them, this is real world. But my gosh, they on Dental Town, when they get a bad Yelp review, they almost have a complete meltdown. It's like you have to walk them off the ledge. It's like, dude, 3 posts ago, you said this company's product was a bunch of shit. What's with that? How come when this patient said this, you almost jump out the window, but then you just called a dental company a piece of shit? So I still think we're evolving through this social media thing, and it just really, really helps. I wish everybody at Dental Town would be transparent and put their real name and face. The only reason we can't do that is because the mother of my mother of dentistry is Rolla Christian, and she scornfully told me, Howard, if you do that, where are my dentists going to go when they need to ask a stupid question? If you're an endodontist, you're not going to post a failed root canal in front of all your referrals will be held against. She goes, if you take away their place to privately ask a stupid question, it's a disservice to dentistry. So, and since Rolla will probably outlive me by a decade, with all that good, clean living, that's the way it is. But they just, dentists are great in the face, but behind the monitor, sometimes they need to be taken out to the woodshed. It's just crazy times. But so the matchmate, that profile, I've seen that on the ADA deal. So her website is adapracticetransitions.com, and you create a free profile. I can't actually create a profile because the last one I filled out was on Plenty of Fish, and I got denied. They said, dude, you're a whale. Get the hell off of here or lose 50 pounds. So I'll have all this trauma if I fill out a new profile again. But the ones I've seen go south, this is where the ones I've seen go south, in a nutshell. Doctor, presents all these amazing cases, and he's every Friday he's doing some big $5, $10, $20,000 case or whatever, and the new guy looks at the big case and says, well, I can do all that skill. Oh yeah, sure you can. But can you sell it? It's 100 times harder to sell a $25,000 case than it is to do all the individual crowns and bridges and root canals and all that kind of stuff. They can't sell it. So they'll buy some practice that's doing like 1.4, and they'll pay like 1.2. And at the end of the first year, that thing didn't even do 800. So, so they didn't have the skill set. So then what's the opposite of that? Or they'll buy a practice where Doc did all of his own molar endo at $1,000 a piece. But Doc doesn't like endo. Well, did you back out every damn root canal out of the sales equation? Did you just pay for the right to do root canals when you're going to refer them out? So then you flip that around. Where's the biggest value? Mike Detola and I used to laugh our butts off forever of how this one of our friends bought this practice from this old guy. All he did was amalgams. He didn't do crown. He just patched everything. This young kid didn't even know it. Just walks into this 4-day-a-week practice from this 70-some-year-old guy selling who'd made all these MODBLs for like 40 years. And on any given random day, 3 or 4 of those would just break into a million pieces and come in, and he would just numb them up and do a crown. And he was doing 4 crowns every single day, Monday through Thursday, unlimited. And it was just like, my God, and he paid this practice. When the average practice right now is about $750. Back in the day, this was like a $285,000 practice. This is just a know-nothing, bottom-tier practice. And it was just the biggest cash cow of all time. And that's what you need to do. So you go find a practice, and he says, I do $1 a year. And then you look at the numbers and say, oh, well, you refer out all your root canals, which I can do, or I can extract teeth, or I can do dentures, or I'm going to add Invisalign or something. So if make sure you're paying for dental services that you can do, and don't be buying the right to do dental services that you can't do. It's just so obvious. But since the buyer didn't have skin in the game, he didn't care. He took the money and run. And I just don't think it's right.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we have a full clinical evaluation sheet. So we encourage the docs, look at the charts. As part of the profile, we actually ask about referral patterns. And that's one of the first things that we look at when we're saying, is this going to be a good fit? And often what we're looking for is an incoming doctor who can provide services that the owner doc isn't now providing. And we absolutely have a nice little checklist, that advises the incoming doctor how to evaluate the operations of the practice. And then they can take that and put that into their own skill set and figure out whether this is something that's going to work for them. Obviously, if a practice is doing 40% IV sedations and this incoming doctor is not doing IV sedations, that's going to be an instant hit to the bottom line. So that's one of those big red flags that pops up. Hey, have you thought about this? Let's take a closer look and see if this is the right place for you. Now, we can evaluate a lot of that behind the scenes. So we can immediately discount some of those things and say, hey, you might want to take a look at this practice, but here are the things that you're going to want to evaluate a little bit more closely to see if this is the right place for you, if everything else is lining up properly. Again, it comes back to these doctors communicating and really taking the time to evaluate. First, is the philosophy right? Does that work out? Yes, great. Now let's talk about the operations of the practice. Before we invest a whole ton of money in accountants and lawyers and everything else, let's just find out whether the operations fit and I can come in and be successful in your practice. If I can, yes, now I want to see all the numbers. I need to make sure that I have all the information that I need so that I can make an offer on your practice. So guiding them through this process will alleviate a lot of those things that you're talking about.
So how much of this, I look at it as like having a dental partner, buying a practice. The best analogy is your parents' marriage, your marriage, things like that. You don't go meet somebody on a first date and marry them. So what percent of these again, my main concern is these kids come out of school. How many of these kids out of school, how long would be a dating period if they said, well, I want to own a own practice and I fill out a profile and yeah, I would like to really think about buying this old man's practice in this small town in Kansas. But I don't want to commit to anything like that. I mean, hell, I haven't even met you. I want to date. How long is that a good strategy to get an associate's job? And how long would a dating period be before the seller and said, let's kind of start writing a prenuptial? You know what I mean? Let's start heading down the road towards marriage.
Yeah, that prenup needs to be in place fairly quickly. Because what we don't want to see happen, and this is what we see happen all too often, is the associate comes into the practice with the understanding that there's going to be a transfer of ownership. Okay. Now, this doesn't work, this can work in either direction. The owner then decides that, hey, you know what? I kind of like the way things are going. Yeah, we'll do an ownership transfer in a couple of years. Yeah, I think I'm going to retire next year, maybe the year after that, maybe the year after that. All of a sudden, it's 10 years down the road. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is the associate comes in, the owner thinks that, yeah, we're going to transfer ownership and I'm going to retire in 3 years or 5 years. But then the associate says, hey, I kind of like being an associate in this practice. I don't think I want to own. Now the owner says, I don't know what to do. I'm high and dry. I was counting on this. So what we encourage people to do is consider all of these things up front. And again, we're talking about understanding your long-term goals. And by understanding what you're looking for out of your transition, you can help to avoid a lot of these problems. But if you don't get it in writing and plan for the future in writing, then you are just opening yourself up to one of these scenarios. So we encourage people as an associate coming into a practice, especially a new grad, we have the conversation up front and say, okay, Dr. Owner, what are your plans here? Are you willing to put those plans in writing? You're not committing to anything. You're just putting your plans in writing. Dr. Incoming, are you looking to eventually have ownership in this practice? Can you see yourself in that practice? If those two things are a yes, and they've met, and they've evaluated operations, and they've made the decision that, yes, we want to give this a try, great. Let's draw up an associateship contract. Within that contract, let's have a 6-month review clause. At that 6-month period, you're going to talk again about this whole ownership thing. And at 1 year in, you want to make a decision. And that decision has to be, Dr. Incoming, are you going to buy this practice? If you are, here's how we're going to lay it out. We're either going to do a staged buy-in or we're going to do a complete buy-in, and then I'm going to be your associate. There are a number of different options at that point, but make that decision and put it in writing. And then when it is in writing after that 1 year, make sure that there's a penalty for an exit at that point.
Well,
may not ever come into play, but if it does, at least you have it.
I grew up on Judge Wapner, and I'm sure you remember Judge Wapner. And I don't know how you could grow up listening to Judge Wapner and not have your damn receipt. I mean, people would always say something, well, blah, 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 blah. And he says, okay, show me your receipt. I didn't keep my receipt. I mean, in fact, watching Judge Wapner in my glove box, that was just a trash can for receipts. And sure enough, once a year, you'd have to go dig through all that trash because you actually needed a damn receipt. And so, you go talk to a dentist and you're at lunch and at dinner and he says he wants to sell next year. And then say it goes the next year, the next year, the next year. And what I think is that people don't understand how much money it takes to retire to maintain a doctor's lifestyle. And when they get close to pulling the trigger and they think, well, my car's old and the wife wants to do this and we want, and then their kids might need something. And one thing about life after another, and they just keep kicking the can down the road. Is it more that? You also talked about the associate who doesn't want to pull the trigger works. Is it more, is it 80-20? Is it 50-50? Do you see more sellers staying on longer than they realized? or do you see more kids not wanting to pull the trigger?
I would say that it's 60-40 towards the owners.
60-40 towards the owner. Okay.
Towards the owners being the problem there. Yeah, the owners they can be a little bit challenging sometimes because they're not sure what to do. And what we do for them is we make sure from the outset that we've had a conversation to say, hey, have you really thought this all the way through? What are your plans for retirement? Do you have the financial wherewithal to continue down this path now? Have you explored other options? I mean, once you've retired from your dental practice, there are other ways to stay involved in dentistry and make some money. There are so many other options out there. Do you want to stay on as an associate to the owner, the new owner? That's always an option. So there are ways to navigate this, but every single doctor has their own agenda. And it's our job to figure out what that agenda is. And again, I think that's where our profile has a lot of value. It helps people to start thinking about what really are my long-term goals? How can I achieve them in the way that makes the most sense?
Yeah, and my gosh, these financing terms, when I talk to bankers, they say, well, one of their problems is they had all these rules of thumb. They had all these metrics, and these metrics are actually written down in their banks, and they based on the purchase practice, it's a trailing 12 months, but you were closed down 2 months, and that's a big donut. I mean, 2 months out of 12, I mean, if you just say 2 divided by 12, hell, you were closed 16.666% of the month. So a lot of these bankers are kicking these loans upstairs and saying, well, I'm good with this loan. I want to go. Everybody wants to pull the trigger, but our bank has this metric, and it's not accounting for 2 donuts in the month of March and April. And now that March and April is now 7-8 months ago, is that starting to change? Are they getting new metrics? Are you seeing some of these deals starting to break loose from what do they call the loan guys? The banker at the loan.
The underwriters.
The underwriters. And the underwriters, they're like actuaries. They don't have enough personality to become an accountant. I mean, these people are numbers driven. So are the underwriters, they got some post-corona metrics now? Or are they still pre-corona?
Yeah, they're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
So that has absolutely been a challenge, which is why we're encouraging our owners to go back and start considering taking on a seller note, at least for a small percentage of the loan. Dental offices are back to about 78% at this point, maybe closer to 80 from the latest data or latest research that came out. So we're getting there. We're getting back to 100%. I don't know how long it's going to be before we get there. So that by itself is reducing the bank's tolerance to loan 100% of the practice value. So if the owner is kind of dead set, this is my number and I'm not budging on it, then they may have to start being more willing to do some seller assist on the financing. And that's something that we're just having to make really very clear. And I'm going to go back and just kind of let you in on this. The smaller market practices are doing much better overall, at least from what I can see. They are now hiring associates again. They are at 100% production, and they're doing just fine.
Oh, so, yeah. But I mean, I know I'm supposed to be politically correct, not talk about sex, violence, rock and roll, all that kind of stuff. But it seems like the only people that will go to a small town is when they come out of school and they're married. If you've already got your wife and your kid, you don't need the bar scene in Scottsdale. And my gosh, and who usually comes out of dental school? Most likely married with one kid walking and one in the oven. I don't want to,
Okay, I
would you
started
guess?
dental school with 2 children, so
Really? Tell
my
us about that journey. So
my
really?
kids were 1 and 2 when I started dental school. Yes, sir.
So are
My
you,
husband and I had owned a business prior to my starting dental school. Um, yeah, that was a journey. So they
well,
were 1
so
and 2, went through 4 years of dental school, so they were 5 and 6 when I graduated. Which is why when I graduated, I looked at my husband and I said, okay, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, which is kind of gray in the winter. And I said, we're either going to go north where winter is winter, or we're going to go south where we don't have to worry about it. And he says, there's no way we're going up north. I said, okay, guess we're going south. So that's how I ended up in Florida.
yeah, and it's that Mississippi River is everybody east of it goes to Florida, and everyone west of it goes to Arizona. I mean, it's just, I mean, and you need to realize human behavior because something like that, you just think, whatever, it's not really a deal. No, it's really a deal. And like when I've been in Ahwatukee for 32 years, and you have an interstate, and there's a whole nother city on the other side, and people just, I mean, that interstate, it might as well be a wall 100 miles high. When you look at your data of your patients, in fact, they'll drive from 5 miles west into my practice, and almost no one drives from 1 mile east into the practice. Humans don't cross rivers and interstates and all these things, and you really got to get into that. I want to ask you 2 politically incorrect questions. Some people say, and I have no expertise to comment on this, even though I grew up with 5 sisters and played Barbie dolls till I was 12, that one of the things changing in dentistry the most is the demographics from basically being an all-boys club to now half women and half boys. And a lot of people are saying that is driving the DSOs because 2 out of every 3 of their employee dentists are female. You're a female. Do you think women are more likely to want to say, I'd rather just be an employee and concentrate on my family? Or do you think that's just a bad rap?
I think that's a bad rap for a number of reasons. Number one, if you want to be a hands-on mother, if you want to be there for your child at their goodness, it was a mommy and me tea tasting party. If you want to be there last minute for your kids, you need to own your own practice. You need to have the ability to control your own schedule. You can grow that practice in whatever direction you want. You take the reins, you take ownership of it. Most of the dentists who graduate from dental school are still interested in ownership, and that's like 64%, I believe, at the last check.
Oh, I
That's
haven't seen any numbers on that. Where'd you get that number?
from HPI, the
Oh,
Health
will
Policy
you email it
Institute.
to me, howard@dentaltown.com, or
I
post it
will
on
do that.
Dentaltown? I have not seen that number, but so you're
I'm pretty
saying
sure
2
it's
out of 3,
64%.
that's 2 out of 3 women. Are you talking about women or total students?
I'm talking about total students, but the
Okay.
class sizes are 50-50.
Yeah.
So I just know from my experience and talking with female dentists, I will tell you a lot of them go into it with the idea that, okay, I can't own my own practice because I want to be a hands-on mother. I want to be a hands-on wife. I want to have that opportunity. What I see is that I have more and more women coming onto our service who are saying, I need to own my own practice because I want to be a hands-on mother. I want to have that opportunity to be there for my family. And I want to have control over how I treat my patients. So women, I have to disagree with you about your feeling or your thought that women are not interested in ownership. It's not been my experience, and it certainly isn't consistent with the dentists that I've been talking to on a very regular basis.
That's awesome. I love to see it when women own their own practice. I actually love it the most when they get divorced and have to pay some punk $8,000 a month alimony for 10 years. I'm like, how does that feel? You like that, huh? It's so awesome to see women dentists just bitching about alimony. It's like, yeah, I know it's a racket. Why don't you get rid of it? It used to be an all males thing, and I'm just loving these women. If you're paying $10,000 a month to some bum, email me, howard@dentaltown.com, and I'll bring you on the show and talk about it because that's what's going to make everybody change. I mean, it's a total racket. Yeah, I go back to my class. There are 20 women dentists in there. those 20 women, their average practice was significantly bigger and more successful. And those girls, pretty much all of them are already retired now. And I got a lot of classmates that are really pissed off that they passed 60 and now they're in a pandemic and they can't retire, mostly because of alimony and things like that. And I just think these are strange times. I want to ask you another very, very politically incorrect question. I told you in the beginning that that when your kids are in a bad spot, they're not going to be real friendly. They're in a bad mood. They're kids. They're tired. They need a nap. They need a better situation. And there's a big old thread on Dental Town said, quit the ADA. And it's all based on the fact that that we had to close down for 2 months, and it was a novel virus. That's what all the experts were saying. We had to. We're all in this together. One species. Is all we got. But what's your spin on all those people that are really pissed off? And by the way, those people were extremely happy when it was the Joshua Tran Osofsky, DMD, president of the New Hampshire Dental Society, said dentists closed their door for 2 months in March and they won't do it again. And everybody's on Dental Town go, yeah, Joshua, you go, Joshua. So the New Hampshire Dental Society, I mean, they're in the press. I mean, it was on their newspaper. So the New Hampshire saying they're not doing it again. What's going to happen if the government? Well, first of all, do you think? We'll talk about the issue. Just talk about the whole issue because it's a big blight. And
yes, it is, and it's really too bad. Well, I take that back. Maybe it's not too bad. Dentists are giving the American Dental Association way more credit for being able to establish federal policy than they deserve. The ADA did not shut down dental offices. That is not the way this works. The states shut down the dental offices. There were some states that never shut down the dental offices. What the ADA did is they went to bat and said, hey, these are essential workers. The ADA is the one who lobbied to get dentists designated as essential workers. So now that they are essential workers, they can't be shut down unless the state says essential workers are shut down, which they're not going to do. So the ADA is trying to protect the dentists and doing whatever they can to do that. I admit freely, I was one of those people who sat in my office for 11 years, 13 years, paid my dental association dues, didn't have any clue what the American Dental Association did for me, just paid my dues. I was one of those people. After I sold my practice, and I had to due to some health issues, I went to work at a federally qualified health center because I really love dentistry and I really have a passion for serving people. And everybody deserves to have access to dental care. At that point, I started getting involved with the Dental Association. I started getting involved in lobbying. I started seeing the things that they actually did. And I was very impressed. I was impressed enough to spend a lot of time with the Florida Dental Association. And by the way, I have to have that shout out to Caesar too. Way to go. But come on, the American Dental Association did not shut dentistry down. The American Dental Association did everything they could to get dentists back up and running. They talked to the national leadership and said, hey, let's get policies in place so that you feel comfortable in your state allowing these dentists to come back to work. The American Dental Association did everything they could, and they had to be conscious of the climate as it existed in that moment. Nobody knew what to do in those first couple of months. They did the best they could.
That is a well said. I mean, and furthermore, it was the Centers for Disease Control that floated the idea first. The Centers for Disease Control wanted to go, and the World Health Organization, and again, it was a novel virus. I mean, it was a brand new virus, so people didn't really know what to do. And but do you think there's I saw but I love the irony of dentists. I mean, Gordon was always telling me about that. He said, "My gosh, I remember one time he was out here in Scottsdale. He had like 500 to 1,000 people, and he was showing this case. I think it was about clear liners." And immediately the whole room thought the four bicuspid extraction was an atrocity, and the occlusion and everything he was trying to teach just drifted in a whole nother direction, because my homies all got 8 years of college. I mean, they got A's in math, applied math is physics, applied physics is biology, chemistry, applied chemistry is biology. I mean, they got their masters in all the tools to tackle any subject. And like on this mask thing, I thought I was talking to Dennis. I said, well, why would you be against a mask policy? And he says, because if they want to force me to wear a mask, dude, cigarettes kill 400,000 Americans a year. You stop selling cigarettes, I'll wear the mask. But I'm not going to wear a mask while that dummy over there is smoking a cigarette. So, and I'm thought, God, that's the way dentists think. I mean, obviously, tobacco is going to kill more people during the pandemic in America than the coronavirus. I mean, can we agree on that?
Yeah.
So I have to wear a mask inside a store that sells cigarettes? Really? So, but then the opposite side of that is never let better be the enemy. Never let best be the enemy of better. So, yeah, but making them wear a mask. Could you imagine if you took their tobacco away? You're in Florida. What would happen to Florida if there was no skull chewing tobacco to be sold anywhere in the state of Florida?
Or even worse, think about Kentucky.
Oh, it'd be an uprising, right? I mean, they would march to the Capitol and it'd be over. So I love the way dentists think about this stuff. But I think I really think I've been watching the emergency room numbers ever since the data's been available, that 8.5% of all the toothaches or emergency room visits are odontogenic origin in my state of Arizona. And my gosh, it just makes me feel bad. I mean, what is wrong with dentistry where we're responsible for not triaging and taking care of 8.5% of the load at the hospitals? And by the way, in 32 years, I've seen some bizarre stuff. I had a patient one time walk in with a 2-foot by 1.5-foot x-ray of the side and a script for Penvk and Percocet because of a swelling and infection. I'm like, they just irradiated your whole upper torso. I mean, it's just crazy. But so if the pandemic breaks out and the hospitals are overloaded, you would have to be insane to even think about shutting down the dental offices if you knew they would triage and keep patients out of the emergency room. But they have no history of that. I mean, I got 10 years of data in Arizona where if you said, well, we got to keep them open because we want to overload the emergency rooms, like, dude, you've been doing it for 10 years. What's going to all of a sudden make you start giving your cell phone number to your patients and being able to go in after hours, or they're closed Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They're closed 3 out of 7 weeks. In fact, the average dentist is only open 32 hours a week, and there's 168 hours in a week. They're not even open. They're closed 81% of the time, and the emergency room's always open. So how do you look at that scenario?
Funny that you should bring up ER diversion. It was one of the things that I was pretty passionate about here in Florida when I was the dental director for the FQHC. And I will tell you that after beating my head against a brick wall for a very long number of years, we finally got the hospital to give us a voucher system we got $100 from the hospital for the patients that we would see from the emergency room. We ended up, oh gosh, I wish I had all of the data in front of me, but we saved the hospital in 1 year over $500,000 just by seeing their patients for them and giving them the opportunity to come to one of the federally qualified health centers. That's kind of an easy answer, but the real problem is the hospitals aren't recognizing that the dentists need to be their partners in this. There are a number of dentists like me out there who have been beating their heads against a brick wall. Jane Grover is kind of the head of that whole thing over at the ADA, the ER diversion programs. And she's got so many different plans to be able to handle some of that overload. And it's the hospitals that are really kind of the holdup there. The dentists are more than willing to be active participants in this.
Well, hey, tell Jane, if she ever wants to come on the show and talk about it, I wish she'd talk about it, because you would have to be absolutely out of your mind to think that the 10-year track record of it being 8.5%, that human behavior doesn't change like that overnight. It's like when they started the no smoking campaign. I mean, and when they started it, I mean, America, the government started this problem when they started giving 6 million troops overseas. They started rationing them a pack a day. Well, when they came back from World War II, guess what? They were addicted to nicotine. So to me, when the government sued them and wanted, this lawsuit, it's like, dude, you started the whole smoking epidemic. And based on the fact that the journalist is just, there's no journalism in the United States. I mean, read Noam Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent. It's been, when they say they're not biased, I mean, come on. Like someone will say, oh, CNN's not biased. Really? They all cry. They all start bawling on TV when a Democrat loses and they're not biased. How out of your flippin' mind are you? I mean, they can't even compose themselves. They're bawling. I mean, if you're a journalist bawling on television, quit your job today, because I don't want to get to know you or your bullshit. I just want to know the facts. The government started the deal. I watched this with GE, where all these lawyers were wanting to sue GE for all these chemicals dumped in the river. Well, they were all made during World War II, and there's a ton of letters written to the President of the United States and the five-star general saying, well, if we make all this stuff, what are we going to do with this? And there it is in the letter, just dump it in the Potomac. You're in the middle of a war. You're getting bombed from Hiroshima to Nagasaki. I mean, it's a horrible thing going on, and no one was caring about the tadpoles in the Potomac at that time. So it's a nice luxury 50 years later to sit there and say, well, we want you to clean it all up and all this stuff. People are complex. These are very, very strange times. I can't believe we went over an hour, but yeah, I'd like to have Jane Grover on if she's head of the diversion of the American Dental Association, because we're still going to have this problem in 10 years. Because I know my homies, they're closed Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They specifically did not want to be a physician at a hospital and work those hours. I mean, hell, California had to pass a law that medical doctor residencies could not work over 100 hours a week because they were falling asleep during surgery. Have you ever even heard of one dentist since Pierre Fauchard that ever worked 100 hours in 1 week? Yeah, California has to write a law to ban that with physicians. My homies, they went to the medical school, country club, dentistry thing, and they're not working evenings and weekends. And if I was going to start a DSO, I have been in small towns. I have walked into the urgent care. I've walked in there with my grandchildren. And I talked to the guy about this problem. He says, yeah, there. And I said, well, what if some dentist came out of school and would you give him some space for free for him to set up a dental office so that at your triage you can say, oh, that's dental related, just go down the hall at the last door and turn left? And he said, hell yes. And I've had other dentists that couldn't get a loan or whatever. They go into small towns of I think 11% of the towns in the Midwest do not even have a dentist. And they've actually gone to the mayor of that town. The mayor of the town says, well, at downtown 1st Street in Maine, we only have one light in this town. There's 6 buildings boarded up. I'll give you a damn building. And if you're going to set up a dental office there, we only have one bank in town. He'll give you a signature loan. And the only people that do it, I don't know how I can politically correct say this, but they're Mormon, they're LDS, they have a family, they already have kids, they go to that small town, they're the only dentist in that town, they get a building for free, they get a signature loan, and the first year they're doing $1.2 million, taking home $400,000. Everybody in that town thinks $10 an hour is the best job in the world. So his labor is always below 20% total cost. Their net income is always over 50%. But I get it. Some people say, well, I'd rather die than live in a town, but you're almost to driverless cars. I mean, I'm in Phoenix where Google did their pilot work for 5 years. We've had the driverless cars. We've all seen them, and humans are so funny. One of the biggest problems they had is people throwing rocks at them. Because my monkeys, they don't like a car without a driver. It scared them, and they're throwing rocks at them in all different parts of town. But and then what's another thing that's totally irrational, because when you're talking about something irrational, it's irrational. Like a lot of people say, well, let's say there is 1,000 people dying a day. You wouldn't close down the country for 1,000 people a day if there's 335 million. I said, well, look at plane flying. I mean, last year, like only one guy died in a commercial air flight. It was on a Southwest Airlines flight. A little piece fell off the engine, cracked the window, and sucked his head out. Most humans like me just compensated. We just said, all right, I don't want a window seat. I'll just move to the aisle row. I mean, big deal. Or just sit in front of the wing. I mean, problem solved. But imagine if 2 fully loaded jumbo jets were falling out of the sky every day in America and killed the same number, 1,000. But my humans, my Homo sapiens, my monkeys who lost their tail, saw 2 jumbo jets fall out of the sky every day. How long do you think it'd take them to close down all the airports? 8 seconds? So if they don't see it firsthand, if they can't feel it and sense it, they just don't get it. But I'm telling you, if I was going to start a DSO, it'd be emergency room DSO. And every hospital I've talked to, they're it's just culture. Why can they remove a tumor out of your brain, do a bypass, and amputate your diabetic foot, but they can't pull a first molar or do a root canal? I mean, it makes zero sense. It's totally just culture. And by the way, there is some lack of culture in Arizona. I was actually upset yesterday at Walmart. A lady was wearing her Christmas pajamas to Walmart before Thanksgiving. You just don't do that. You don't wear your Christmas pajamas to Walmart till after Thanksgiving. Have some class, Arizona. My God. One other thing I want to ask you about is sometimes the hardest thing to do with a human, I mean, satisfaction equals perception of what's happening minus what I expected. And the hardest thing to do with a human is change your expectations. And I'm trying to tell some of these kids, I know you signed up for dental school, your dream job, all that kind of stuff, but we're in the middle of a once-a-century pandemic. Maybe you should change your perception and get a job at a, what do you call it, FHQ? Is that what they're called that you worked at?
FQHC.
FQHC.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that maybe there's other alternatives and maybe there's other things you can do right now during a once-in-a-century pandemic that maybe you weren't thinking about when you signed up for dental school.
Well, there's a big perception there that public health dentistry is inferior, that it's poor working conditions. There are a lot of perceptions out there when you say the words public health. And I am going to admit to having had some of those perceptions. Let me tell you, my practice was quite high end. And most of my patients were the CEOs and their wives in Ponte Vedra Beach. When I went to the FQHC, my commitment at that point and at that moment was, I am going to give this population the exact same care that I gave to my CEOs and my wives of the CEOs. And I am proud to say that I would pit the dentistry that was done during my tenure there and goes on today, because I know who took it over. I could put it against any dentist in the area because we paid attention to quality. We had some of the advantages of working in a public health. You have set working hours. There's little to no call. You have a guaranteed paycheck. You have the ability to provide care however you want to, as long as you're in the right situation. There are a number of FQHCs that give their dentists pretty much free rein to do dentistry however they want. I was doing full mouth reconstructions on homeless people. The patients are expected to pay a very small amount. That small amount represents a huge chunk to them. It's an opportunity to change the way people think about dentistry. One of the most gratifying moments was when we finished with one young lady, and she said, my children, since I started this process, have brushed their teeth twice a day and flossed every day since I started this. And they now are in a habit, because that happened took a long time to get the treatment completed. They have habits now that they can take with them. So we're changing the mindset of an entire population. That's a pretty special thing. And it's one heck of a moment for a dentist who just wants to help people. So many opportunities exist out there like that. Don't discount those. You have to search a little bit sometimes, and you've got to find just the right situation for you and your needs. But there's so many opportunities. So I would encourage a lot of these younger dentists, especially now, who are really searching for something different and changing their perception. Go look to public health. There are a lot of advantages there and a lot of really great opportunities.
And I just want to say one thing about expectations. I mean, I totally love anthropology because the teeth last the longest and they always have the most evidence is dental related. I love anthropology, but obviously all animals want their own nest. I mean, look at a woodpecker sitting there beating his beaker into that tree because he wants safety. He wants his own hole. And I got 4 dogs, you let them out in the morning. They go pee and mark their territory, and this is their tree. I get that, and you want to own your own place. And a lot of you want to go back to that small town, and you want to own your own practice, and you don't want to buy somebody else's. Okay, I get it, but there's this little thing you might not have heard about called Wall Street that is completely built on mergers and acquisitions, which is why if you look at the 500 publicly traded companies in the year 2000, already half of them don't even exist anymore. When I got out of high school, the average age of the S&P 500 was a grandfather. It was over 60. Now that I'm almost 60, the average age of a Fortune 500 company isn't even a teenager. And by the time you're as old as me, the average company won't even be 10 years old. And you go into this small town and you want to set up your own practice, and there's some old guy selling. So the town's got 10,000 people, and there's 10 dentists, and this old guy's selling. You want to build your own. So now there was 10. You build your own. Now there's 11, and then old man sells to young kid, and now you're competing with a high energy doc in their 20s or 30s. So that's just not how Wall Street would do it. They would buy out that old man. Because now, it's gone from 10, and every time I've ever found and met a dentist collecting $3 or $4 million, it's only that strategy. I've not seen another strategy. Well, I came here, there were 8 dentists, and about every 5 years, some old guy retires, and now this town's only got 3 dentists, and of the 5 that I bought, almost all of them stayed part-time 1 day a week to sometimes 2 days a week. And then something would happen in their life financially and they'd bump it up to 4 days a week. And I mean, they just own this town through mergers and acquisitions. That's why Bob Fontana just bought Clear Choice, because he didn't have to go set up, a whole chain of implant centers across the nation. He just buys it. And by the way, so this is going to go on forever. I just want to, on Dental Town under practice transitions, it's a real active part. It's broken up into Associates Corner, future planning, life after dentistry, partnerships and associates, practice acquisitions, practice sales, practice startups, retirement planning, and then life after retired dentist forum, which, by the way, the most active dentists on Dental Town are the ones that retire, because they sold their practice, but I mean, they didn't own a restaurant. I mean, when you own a restaurant, your personal identity isn't a baker. But a dentist, they sell their dental office. Everybody still calls them doc. They still go to these CE events. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I'm lecturing, and I find out the guy sitting in the front row sold his practice 5 years ago. But he's a dentist. So just final question. I know we went into overtime, and you got better things to do than yak with me all day. But for that old man that's planning on selling his practice and retiring sooner rather than later. He's not on Instagram. He's not on Snapchat. And he wants a return on investment. Like in real estate, it's a fact that if you go fix up your home in Arizona and put in a brand new swimming pool, you're not going to get that swimming pool back out of the purchase price. You lost money on the swimming pool. And so Doc's thinking, well, I would not want to invest $1 fixing up this old thing to sell if I didn't at least get the dollar back at a bare minimum. And it'd be nice maybe to get $1.25, $1.50. Is there any advice you have to old senile dentists who are thinking about laying down their drill and retiring, of what they could do to increase the value of their practice in the eyes of young millennials?
Yes. And I will make this short and sweet. The one thing that the new generation of dentists seems to value as the number one indicator of whether they will or will not fit into a practice, as far as the technology goes, is digital radiography. They all seem that seems to be the number one determinant of whether they will even look at a practice. It could have, if you don't even have that, then you better be in a really good area, and you better have some kind of other draws that these docs can look to.
You know, that's so funny because my oldest grandchild turned 13, and he asked me one day what this room was for, and I had to tell him it was a dark room. And he said, well, what is a dark room? And I had to explain to him how it started off, we were dipping him in liquids, and then when the AT2000 came out and automated the dipping, we were like, man, that was the greatest thing in the world. I still think the AT2000 was the greatest thing that ever happened to dentistry. And the CBCT is a bunch of crap compared to when the Pano did that software upload and they put a R on the right side and an L on the left, and all your patients could see the right and the left. That's the only thing anybody could read. Is like, is that my right side? Hell yeah, homie. So I'll take the right, left Pano and the AT2000. But so you're saying digital radiography. I agree. And you guys, all I want to say is this. At the end of the day, Pierre Fichard, was the first one that got the barber surgeons to give up cutting hair and let's do this teeth thing full time. And then 100 years later, we had G.V. Black. And then when I got out of school, I actually met a dentist who practiced outside in St. Joe, Missouri. And when I asked him what was the greatest thing about the Great Depression, he said, well, because he graduated in 27, I said, oh, man, that must have sucked because 29 wasn't a good year. And he goes, well, 29 wasn't a good year for Wall Street, but we didn't know about that. I mean, that was Wall Street. It took all the way till 32 to trickle down to the Midwest. And we suffered the Depression 32 to 36. But he says, best damn thing that happened to dentistry because we could never afford to go inside. But when everything went bankrupt and boarded up and closed up, finally the mayor's like, well, just unboard these things and let these guys go inside. Hell, it's winter outside, and here's a boarded up building. You can still do that today in 2020. Every small town I've ever driven through has boarded up buildings. And what Dr. Rue was telling me was that when they moved inside, they all kind of had a pact amongst themselves that they were going to give up the barber side. They were just going to go in and do straight stand-up dentistry, and you want to get your hair cut, you can go somewhere else. I mean, so, there's just think outside the box, but the bottom line is I don't care if you're a DSO, private practice, a dental insurance company, a dental manufacturer. I don't care who you are. You're a top line. Those are all the numerators, and they're all divided by one denominator, the patient. And if you don't keep one eye on the patient and one eye on cost, then 8 billion humans are not going to have the freedom to afford to go to the dentist. And you only became a dentist to help your patient, and the whole industry starts when a human gives a dentist $1 to fix something in their mouth. And it's all about the patient, and and the value chain works so well together at Intel and Motorola. Whenever you're dealing or talking with somebody higher up in another industry, the whole value chain courts each other, dates each other, shares information, everything they can, because they know if they don't get out their computer faster, better, smaller, cheaper, higher quality, they all lose. And in dentistry, it's all about the patient. And I don't really care what doc thinks about a DSO or Delta Dental or the ADA. I want to know, do all your policies divided by the patient, do they make dentistry faster, better, easier, lower cost, higher quality. It's all about the patient, and every dentist I know that keeps one eye on the patient and one eye on cost and drowns out all the noise from the dysfunctional value chain, they do very well in dentistry. And on that note, thank you so much for coming on the show. If that Jane Grover, who's a DMD and a MPH, a DDS, Master of Public Health, if she can talk about how dentists can do their job without having to rely on an emergency room who's really sick of her crap. I mean, go to an emergency room, tell the head ER guy you're a dentist, and he'll roll his eyes. So the next time you're whining, well, some people don't think dentists are real doctors. Well, nobody in the emergency room thinks you're a real doctor. And,
I'm going to interrupt you, Howard. I haven't done that the entire time.
Right on.
But I'm going to interrupt you because it's not the ER docs. They are more than willing to embrace us. It's the C-suite guys. They're the ones who aren't giving us the opportunities that we need to be able to have in order to come in and treat those patients.
Okay,
because
well, define the
I have
C-suite
been there.
guys. So
I mean, it's the hospital administrators, it's the insurance people. They don't see this as a value add enough. I literally had a hospital administrator tell me, yeah, that's about 8%. That's not enough for us to invest that kind of money in this.
Wow.
They are the ones. When I went and talked with the ER folks, they're all about it. Oh, yes, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. When I go up and I talk to the hospital administrators and the CEOs, and then they get the insurance companies involved, that's when things break down because they're fine to charge $30,000. Literally saw a guy come in like you with a bill for $30,000 because he had to have a CAT scan and a PET scan for an infected second molar.
So you're saying it's the CEO, the chief financial officer, the chief operator, the CEO, the chief information officer. You're saying all the C-suite people are saying. I mean, obviously, if 8.5% of Americans, I mean, half of America goes to Walmart in any given week or month. If half of America went to Walmart and 8.5% of them wanted an item, what's the chance Walmart would carry it? 100%, and they'd make 12.5% net income on it. So you're saying that it's the C-suite hospital executives that aren't doing this right.
That's been my experience, and I did it for 6.5 years, pounding the pavement. I went and I talked to legislators, I talked to the CEOs, I talked to the hospital administrators, I talked to the CFOs, and it took a long time of me beating down a lot of doors in order to get any funding. And I just said, let me send them my way. Send them my way. I'll take care of them. So
interesting. Well, thank you for that point. Susan, seriously, thank you so much for taking your time. You are just more than wonderful. So if someone wants to contact you, they just go to adapracticetransitions.com or how would they follow up if they got a specific?
If they have a specific question, they can always email me at Ebert, EBERTS @ada.org, or they can just go to our website and email adapt, ADAPT at, what is that? Okay, now I just had a blank. Go ahead and just email us at adapt@ada.org.
So you were trying to think of what? A website or?
No, just if they have questions, they can go to the website, adapracticetransitions.com, and there's a contact us form.
Oh, okay. Contact us.
Yes.
Let me see.
Contact us at adapt@ada.org.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. Okay, create
Yeah,
profile,
please.
log on. Sounds too good. Save that. Okay. Contact us. Yeah, if you just go there, go to adapracticetransition.com. They got a contact sheet, questions. The email is adapt@ada.org. adapt@ada.org. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was just an honor to podcast you.
Well, thank you so much, Howard. It was an honor to be here. It truly was.
All right, and good luck with those grandkids.
Thank you. You too.